In the heart of ancient Cambodia, beneath the gilded towers of Angkor, power was never secure. It whispered through corridors lined with stone gods, traded in glances more than decrees. The Khmer Empire, remembered for its colossal temples and radiant art, was also a kingdom where loyalty was a weapon, and ambition the deadliest sin. Behind every victory on the battlefield lay another war, one fought in the shadows of the palace. In these marble halls, generals plotted against kings, queens commanded armies through whispers, and priests invoked divine will to crown new rulers. The pulse of intrigue beat louder than the drums of war. When the royal court fractured, the empire trembled, and when power changed hands, rivers ran red. Tonight, we uncover the silent war that shaped the fate of one of the greatest civilizations of the East, a world where the sharpest blade was not always forged in steel, but in deceit. This is the untold story of Khmer political intrigue and its effect on war outcomes, where empires rose not only by conquest, but by cunning. Part 1. The Serpent Behind the Throne. In the heat of the Cambodian plains, where the horizon blurs into the haze of gold and dust, the empire of the Khmers rose like a miracle of stone. From the heart of Angkor, its kings commanded armies, built monuments that defied time, and ruled lands that stretched beyond the borders of modern imagination. Yet behind the triumphs carved into sandstone, another story unfolded, one written in secrecy and fear. For beneath every crown, there coiled a serpent. The empire's greatest monarchs did not rise by destiny alone. They were shaped by shadows, by courtiers who smiled as they poisoned cups, by priests who declared divine will as easily as they broke it, and by generals who bowed by day but plotted by night. It was this hidden theater of intrigue that decided who wore the crown, who fell beneath the sword, and which wars were ever fought at all. In the early days of the empire, when Jayavarman II declared himself Devaraja, the god king, his coronation was more than divine ceremony. It was an act of rebellion cloaked in faith. Cambodia's scattered chiefdoms had long been puppets to Javanese influence, their rulers sworn to foreign overlords. Jayavarman's vision of uniting the Khmer lands was born not from peace, but from defiance. Yet even as he proclaimed his divine right to rule, enemies gathered within his circle. The newly crowned king was not only at war with outsiders, he was at war with his own court. His advisors, once loyal lords, began to fracture into factions. Some believed the empire should seek harmony through religion and trade. Others saw conquest as the only path to eternal glory. Between these factions, spies whispered, generals hesitated, and orders were lost before reaching the front. The result was chaos disguised as strategy. Campaigns that should have been swift turned to blood-soaked stalemates, not because the enemy was strong, but because the empire's own heart was divided. When Jayavarman II's successors expanded the Khmer realm, the pattern only deepened. Kings rose and fell not through the force of their armies, but through the precision of their political games. Yasovarman I, known for building the great city of Yasodharapura, faced silent opposition from his own blood. Brothers and cousins claimed divine legitimacy, invoking the gods of Vishnu and Shiva as their allies. The temples themselves became symbols of power, each sanctuary built not merely to honor faith, but to stake a claim to heaven's endorsement. The more magnificent the temple, the greater the authority of its patron. Stone became a weapon. As rival princes raised their own shrines, war became inevitable. But even these wars were shaped less by soldiers and more by whispers. A general might switch allegiance in the night. A supply convoy might never reach the front lines. Victory or defeat often depended on which priest blessed the banners, not which commander led the charge. And while the people toiled, building monuments to gods and kings alike, they were unknowingly constructing the walls of a political labyrinth that no one could escape. By the 12th century, during the reign of Suryavarman II, the serpent behind the throne struck with both beauty and venom. Suryavarman, the visionary who would raise Angkor Wat from the earth, ruled through both faith and fear. He was a warrior of unmatched ambition, but his true battles were not only fought against foreign states like Champa or Dai Viet, they were fought within his own palace. The royal court of Angkor shimmered with ritual and splendor, but beneath the gold lay poison. Suryavarman had seized the throne after a brutal civil war that left thousands dead. His path to power was paved through betrayal. He had been a prince of uncertain claim, a usurper to some, a savior to others. When he marched upon Angkor, he was not alone. His allies were discontented nobles, courtiers promised wealth, and priests who had grown weary of the old lion's weakness. Together they overthrew the reigning monarch, and the new king took the throne amid the smoke of his enemies' pyres. Yet once in power, he faced the same web he had once spun. The court that had helped him rise began to pull in different directions. Some sought reward, others feared retribution, and a few plotted to replace him altogether. To maintain control, Suryavarman transformed the image of kingship itself. He declared his rule divinely ordained by Vishnu, building Angkor Wat as both a temple and a political statement, an eternal claim that his reign was not the work of man, but of God. But faith could not silence fear. Rumors spread of assassins in the night, of generals found dead after secret meetings, of royal decrees rewritten before sunrise. The king's paranoia became legend. He trusted only a handful of loyal guards and a small circle of Brahmins whose chants echoed through the palace like protective spells. The war against Kampa raged on, but behind the front lines, the true war, the political one, consumed the capital. While the Khmer armies marched eastward, supply chains were sabotaged, orders countermanded, and rival nobles whispered of the king's divine madness. Some believed his obsession with temple building drained the empire's strength. Others accused his advisors of manipulating him through superstition. Every stone laid in Angkor Wat was rumored to cost not only gold but lives, soldiers diverted from the battlefield to serve divine vanity. When the armies of Champa struck back, the empire was slow to respond. The king's council could not agree on strategy, and rival generals withheld reinforcements, hoping defeat might weaken Suryavarman's grip. The war dragged into stalemate, not for lack of courage, but for lack of unity. Even as the towers of Angkor Wat rose toward heaven, the foundation of the empire trembled beneath the weight of its own deceit. Suryavarman died before seeing his temple completed. Some say fever took him, others whispered he was poisoned. Whatever the truth, his death ignited a storm. The succession crisis that followed plunged the empire once again into intrigue. Ministers forged decrees, claiming the dying king had chosen their preferred heir. Rival princes gathered armies. The great temple of Angkor Wat, meant to symbolize eternal order, became the silent witness of another war born from ambition. As decades passed, the pattern repeated like a curse. Power shifted hands through treachery more often than through lineage. The Khmer people continued to build, fight, and pray, unaware that the very leaders they revered were pawns in an endless game of deception. In the quiet hours of night, when the court slept, the palace torchlight would flicker across carvings of gods and demons locked in battle, a reflection of the living struggle that consumed the empire itself. For every grand victory on the battlefield, there had been a dozen unseen defeats in the court. The wars that expanded the empire were as much shaped. Part 2. Betrayal, Blades, and the Fall of Kingdoms. When Suryavarman II's ashes cooled, the empire stood at the height of its power. Yet within its gilded walls, the silence after his death was deceptive. It was the stillness before the storm, the hush that follows when ambition tastes blood. In the heart of Angkor, factions moved like ghosts. Ministers aligned themselves behind rival heirs. Soldiers swore loyalty with one hand and sharpened daggers with the other. The king's death had opened a door that could never again be closed. The throne of the Khmer Empire became both a prize and a curse. It promised immortality, yet demanded constant blood to sustain it. The successors of Suryavarman II fought not only against external threats, but also against the empire's own reflection, the legacy of deceit he left behind. The divine right of kings, once a sacred oath, had turned into a weapon. Each ruler claimed the gods themselves had chosen them, and each used religion to crush dissent. The priests who once guided kings now became brokers of legitimacy. For a price, a ruler's sins could be forgiven, and an usurper could become divine. Among these fractured reigns rose Jayavarman VII, a man who would redefine both war and mercy. To his people, he was a savior. To his enemies, he was a phantom of vengeance. When the Khmers invaded and desecrated Angkor itself, burning its shrines and looting its treasures, it was Jayavarman who rallied the scattered Khmer armies. His rise from defeat was nothing short of miraculous. He waged war not merely to reclaim a kingdom, but to cleanse a wound that had scarred his soul. But even this war was born from intrigue. The Khmer invasion had not been a mere act of foreign aggression. Whispers in the palace hinted that certain nobles, discontented with the previous king's weakness, had invited the enemy in, hoping to replace the throne with a puppet of their own making. Whether rumor or truth, it revealed how deeply betrayal had rooted itself into Khmer soil. By the time the Khmers were driven out, Jayavarman's wrath had turned inward. He purged his court with quiet precision, leaving no room for disloyalty. Yet his vengeance came with a price. To secure the empire, he demanded obedience not only from men but from belief itself. His reign blended politics with faith to a degree unseen before. He built Bayon at the heart of Angkor Thom, a temple of stone faces that seemed to watch every subject, every official, every thought. To the faithful, those serene faces represented the all-seeing compassion of the king. To those who remembered the court's older games, they were a warning that no whisper, no plot, no secret meeting could hide from the gaze of their ruler. Under Jayavarman Tujuh, the empire reached its grandest glory. Roads stretched across mountains, hospitals and rest houses dotted the landscape, and the name of Angkor commanded awe across the lands of Southeast Asia. But behind that brilliance, the serpent still moved. His ministers had learned that open rebellion no longer worked. Now they turned to subtler means, slow corruption, silent misdirection, and the manipulation of faith. The empire's vast infrastructure, built to connect and heal, also became a tool of control. Every road led back to Angkor, every message passed through royal eyes. The wars Jayavarman waged against Champa and Dai Viet were fueled as much by politics as by vengeance. Victories were followed by forced resettlements, the movement of entire populations from conquered lands into Khmer territory. In these migrations, families were torn apart, traditions uprooted, and resentment planted like seeds. The king believed he was forging unity. What he truly forged was quiet bitterness. And when the old king's strength faded, those silenced resentments began to stir. After Jayavarman's death, the empire's image cracked once more. Successors claimed his mantle, but none could wield it. The court turned into a battlefield of invisible wars. Nobles bribed the priesthood to rewrite divine lineage. Generals raised troops under the pretense of defending the realm, only to march them against rivals. The temples, once built for gods, now served as fortresses of ambition. Foreign powers watched with patience. The Khmers, long humiliated, sought revenge. The rising Dai Viet kingdoms to the east saw opportunity in Khmer weakness. Even Siam, once a vassal, began to stir. Yet none of them posed a greater threat than the empire's own corruption. When armies were summoned, treasuries were empty. When orders were given, generals debated which master to obey. The sacred unity Jayavarman had carved from chaos dissolved like mist under the morning sun. Angkor's wars became desperate dances of pride and paranoia. Battles were lost before they began, not because the Khmer were weak, but because they no longer trusted one another. In one campaign, a general withheld reinforcements to ensure his rival's downfall, only to doom the entire army. In another, royal envoys were murdered before they reached their allies, their sealed letters found in the chambers of traitors. The enemy no longer needed to invade. The empire was collapsing from within. As decades passed, the stone faces of Bayon looked down upon a city that had forgotten its unity. The canals ran dry, the jungles crept closer, and the once golden towers began to darken. Merchants whispered of new powers rising to the west, the Siamese Ayutthaya kingdom, while the royal court quarreled over succession and ceremony. Each king sought legitimacy by building one more temple, one more monument, one more declaration of divine right, until even the gods seemed weary of their prayers. The fall of Angkor was not sudden. It was the slow bleeding of an empire that had lost its soul. When the Siamese armies finally marched upon the capital in the 15th century, they met little resistance. The great walls that had withstood centuries of storms were empty shells. guarded by soldiers whose loyalty had been bought and sold too many times. The city burned not in glory, but in silence. The towers of Angkor Wat, blackened by smoke, stood as the last witnesses of a kingdom undone by its own ambitions. Legends later told that when the invaders looted the temple, they found not only treasures but scrolls, letters of secret alliances, lists of bribes, decrees, never enacted, each a fragment of the invisible war that had devoured the empire from within. The conquerors carried gold and idols, but they left behind something far heavier, the truth that empires die not by the sword, but by their own shadows. Even after Angkor's fall, its memory lingered. The temples became monuments not only of divine art, but of human folly. Monks who wandered through the ruins spoke of voices that echoed through the corridors at night, whispers of forgotten courtiers, schemers, and kings who still debated the fates of wars long lost. The serpent had outlived them all. Centuries later, when historians traced the empire's decline, they found its greatest battles were not those fought against foreign armies, but those fought in silence. The Khmer Empire was built upon vision, genius, and the sweat of millions. Yet what unmade it was the hunger for power within its own heart. Each betrayal weakened its walls. Each act of deceit carved another crack into the stone. By the time the final invaders arrived, the empire was already a ghost, majestic, hollow, and doomed. And so the story of the Khmers reminds us that greatness is never eternal. Behind every throne lies a shadow, and within every empire, a whisper of its own destruction. The same hands that build monuments can also dismantle them. The same faith that unites can divide. The same ambition that crowns a king can condemn a kingdom. In the ruins of Angkor, the faces of Bayons still watch in silence. Their smiles are serene, their gaze eternal. Perhaps they remember the glories of the past, or perhaps they mourn what could have been. But if you look closely, you might sense something deeper. The faint echo of intrigue, the breath of ambition that still lingers in the stones. For history is not only written by victors, it is also whispered by traitors, carried by survivors, and preserved by ruins. The Khmer Empire may have fallen, but its lessons endure, that empires do not die from outside forces alone, they are undone from within. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.